this is what you're doing wrong when writing Lewis structures. This video is specifically for our grade 10 learners. So remember, in grade 10 there are two different methods for writing Lewis structures. You have one method for the covalent bonds and one method for the ionic bonds. So before I start just drawing on my Lewis structure, I should first look at, do I have a molecule or do I have an ionic compound, because they work differently. For the molecule, what you're going to do is to remember that covalent bonds exist between non-metals. And the thing with non-metals is they're both pretty greedy. So they really don't want to give away their electrons. So neither one of the atoms in my molecule is going to give away its electrons. So what they're going to do is they're going to share their electrons, because ultimately they want 8 electrons around them. And this is how the bond is formed in my molecule, by the sharing of electrons. Now let's take a look at our ionic compounds. Ionic compounds form with a non-metal and a metal. So the metal doesn't attract its electrons very strongly, whereas the non-metal normally has a high electronegativity, so they attract their electrons pretty strongly. So what happens is my metal says, okay, no, it's fine, you can have my electrons, because if I give them away, my outer shell will be empty, and then I will be stable. And my non-metal says, okay, then I'll take your electrons, and then my outer shell will be filled and I will be stable. And then we have a cation that forms, and we have an anion that forms. And it's the result of these opposite charges that form the bond, because the positive cation and the negative anion attract each other, and this is where the bond forms. So it's really important. You'll see the ionic compounds have 3 different steps. So it's important that you show all 3 your steps, whereas the molecules just have the sharing of electrons. So they just look like this. So they normally count for less marks than the ionic compounds because they have less steps. So before you start with your Lewis structure, please first determine whether you're dealing with a molecule with covalent bonds or an ionic compound with ionic bonds.